Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me for this beautiful mini lecture on understanding a concept that I've coined called the pelvic permission. It is a space within our body that when we allow it somatically to engage, everything that we experience on the table or somatically within whatever practice completely takes on a different flavor, a different nature, a different energy. And it's extremely transformative. And this is what we call, or what I call, the pelvic permission. So, what I've noticed with a lot of somatic practices, somatic trainings, embodiment trainings, nervous system optimization trainings, is that there is a very evident exclusion of this part of our body. It is still highly stigmatized, highly like ostracized in these environments and spaces. It's almost as if we have not gone over that element of sexual shame, the potential and psychology of the undertones that we have in a collective, specifically in different societies where either it's super expected, super accepted and expected to perform in a certain way, and or it's extremely shamed and concealed. And so we have this big spectrum of how people relate to this highly potentially quote unquote controversial part of our body. And what we're doing is we are bringing in a lot of sovereignty, a lot of integrity to working with what I would argue as the potentially strongest part of our embodiment and integration as a person in a body, as a consciousness that lives inside of a body. And it's so beautiful. And the nature of the pelvic floor and the nature of the pelvis is actually very playful and very innocent and highly interactive. And before we even get too deep into the concept of pelvic permission, I want to introduce the concept of understanding the fascia. And so there are all of these different definitions around fascia and this quote unquote soft tissue of our body. And so I grew up, and maybe you grew up in the same generation, where I was told initially that your largest organ was your liver, and then a few years later the narrative changed and it was our skin, and then a few years later it's like, oh no, there's this new thing called fascia, that's our largest organ. And then we have all these beautiful people like Stephen Levine who are experts in fascia and have written books and dedicated a big portion of their research into understanding what fascia is. And his definition is fascia is everything in your body other than the components of what's within your cell and your bones. And this is where my definition of fascia comes in, and I argue, and for those of you that want to go into TVM advanced practitioner, you'll see that the bones are able to decalcify with the right environments and release stem cells and do all sorts of wonderful things and reform or reshape themselves, because with TVM we predominantly work with understanding the calcifications or the contractions that work in the body, and we help move that and change that and alchemize that, transform it into something that is more in the truest nature of the human body. So my definition of fascia is actually, yes, I agree, fascia is everything, and it does include the bones. The reason I say that is because if you look at the structure of fascia, and there are many videos online, and if you are in our training, then you would see the videos that we share with you, and you can find them online regardless, of these beautiful structures or webs that come together to create structure. And it's within our fascia. But that's exactly what our bones look like, except they're calcified. They're harder. And then when he also says it's excluding what is within the cell, the components of a cell The components of the cell also have structures, and they do move and they change and they alchemize like everything else in the body. So there's also a question mark around my own definition and how that is evolving around what is fascia. And what I will end this little definition of fascia and the way I understand it, the way that I teach it, is that fascia is a highly interactive part of our body. It's conscious, it's aware, and it's moving and it's changing structures as we relate to it. And I do remember this day very clearly. It was about 3 years ago when a preliminary study, peer-reviewed, showed up, because I was looking for this. I've been looking for it for about 8 years at this point. Proof that the fascia is interactive. And this introductory paper said that your fascia, our fascia, knows who is touching it and creates an independent relationship to the person that is touching it. So it is aware and it's forging a relationship. It's like, I like the way you touch me. You come with integrity. I say hello to you. You say hello to me. We interact with one another. That's a relationship. There's a mutual trust, understanding, or mistrust or misunderstanding. This is a really interesting part that we teach extensively in our trainings. How are you touching yourself? What kind of relationship do you have to the other consciousnesses that live within you? And what kind of relationship do you allow or permit or potentially fawn or people please around the people that get to touch you? And so there is a big integrity piece here to explore within our own self-development, our own embodiment. That being said, fascia is highly interactive. So now we have the foundation of understanding that fascia is interactive. And when you think about your pelvis or pelvic floor, it is one of the most interactive parts of our bodies. We may think that our organs are really interactive. They are. We may think that our head, our five senses, specifically your eyesight, your capacity to speak, articulate, share, make sound, smell, hear, it's like highly interactive. That being said, the pelvic floor, to me personally, Madge, who's teaching this masterclass, is telling you that my perception is that the pelvic floor is the most highly interactive, highly adaptable place in the human body technology. When I work with the fascia or work with the technology of the pelvic floor and the pelvis, the amount of change that happens is mind-blowing. My clients who receive TVM pelvic floor sessions tell me they actually feel what I feel. I'm like, your entire pelvis felt like it went liquid. They're like, I felt that. It went like liquid. Like everything was moving within itself and changing and reforming. And there are many schools of movement and somatics who say that where your pelvis is where your body is. You cannot be embodied without your pelvic floor. It's like this central piece. And what I also love about Tom Meyer's work is understanding that when the evolutionary piece came in, when we started to become more erect in this space within ourselves, that the origin of that shift of our consciousness really happened, and it started off from an evolutionary space within the pelvis itself. So the pelvis and the pelvic floor is this beautiful rooting of who we are and how we've been able to evolve and explore our consciousness in a way that allowed the spine, the brain, the head to, as a consequence to the shift in the pelvic floor and the pelvis, to be able to restructure itself, that we are able to access higher consciousness, be able to have this self-awareness, the imagination, the dreaming, and all of these wonderful aspects of our nature. And so this is a really beautiful place to start in. It is also the place where when you look at the beginning of your embodiment, if you're into somatics and you're into being in the body, then you understand that there's a zinc spark that happens, is this lightning explosion that happens in a successful fertilization. It is when the sperm collides successfully in activating life within an egg. Igniting is an ignition that happens, and it turns on this massive light. And fertility clinics today around the world use the ignition of light, or that marker, as a successful fertilization. And those are the embryos or zygotes, the way you want it, whatever way you want to define it, are being embedded into the fertility, into the uterus, to create that successful fertilization and successful, hopefully, gestation into life. And so there's this lightning moment that happens in this part of our technology that signifies that this is a place that takes place, whether it happens in an in vitro clinic, whether it happens within a uterus. It's the same thing. There is an activation that happens, and then the growth continues to happen in a uterus. That is the space where we as a species grow, or that activation of life organically, endogenously, is happening. And so a lot of people who are spiritual or into the exploration from a scientific perspective around where life begins, where does consciousness start, are looking into this part of our consciousness and our body. They're like, is this the part of our technology where that energy or intention or string of light converts from a charge that is in the field into quantified matter, or the embodiment? And so this is a beautiful space to explore from that perspective, and everything else that amplifies and implies. So you're looking into the prospect of your intentions, your affirmations, your manifestations. Where can they come through into being materialized in your being? Potentially through your technology of your pelvis and pelvic floor. This has been spoken about through traditional medicine, through very Eastern modalities and methodologies around how we can bring thought, intention, and into matter, and bring it into this creative force, and the importance of this part of our body. And this is why it's so sacred. You create from here. That also being said, we are also exploring beyond this. We're exploring, well, this is a highly interactive part of the body, and this is my own interpretation and perception of it. When I come in and I place my hand on someone's pelvic floor, or even pubic bone, I wait for a response. I say hello, and I wait, and I do not go beyond the hello until I get a hello back, because a lot of us could have frozen pelvic floors, frozen pelvises, where the amount of trauma or disassociation, disconnection has gotten so embodied. It's just going to take some time, and this is where the patience and the love and the compassion has to come through. Like, this compassionate hello is like, I am going to be here and I'm going to listen to you, and I'm not going to let go until I hear you say hello back to me. And a lot of my students tell me, they're like, oh, Matt, just kind of like how you rehabilitate, like, a pet that was traumatized. Like, you just got to give it time and space. I'm like, you got to give your pelvis and your pelvic floor time and space. You can't rush things there. And this is like it's so contradictory to what a lot of mainstream interpretations of how to interpret and how to interact with the pelvic floor and the pelvis are, specifically in the realms of sexuality. And you see it in modern day sexuality movies, songs, porn. It's this very rushed, very aggressive, like, you're going to give me what I want now. And the system can get depressed and get shut down. This is another thing that I teach, psychology of the body. Your tissue can get depressed and it can shut down, it can freeze, and it can disassociate from you. And this is one of the biggest questions I ask my clients who come in who want to do pelvic floor work or have trauma in their pelvic floor and pelvis. And I ask them, like, do you have sexual interactions with your body? With another person or with yourself, and when you do that, is that goal oriented around what you want it to do opposed to you actually creating a connection? And this is the piece that people are like, whoa, I never thought about that. I never even considered this as something for me to question or relate to. And that's huge. That's such a big deal, because I will say something that is extremely triggering right now. So this is a trigger warning. I have a belief that most individuals, and I have two hands up because I used to do this, when we self-pleasure, when I used to self-pleasure, I do not think that I was actually pleasuring my body. I was triggering a chemical reaction within my body. I was triggering something, a release within my body, but it wasn't really consensual to this part of my body. I do not believe that I was doing it with integrity. I was disassociating within my mind into some sort of fantasy. I wrote a story and I made my body deliver according to that story. And I am so incredibly regretful that I did that to myself, because nobody taught me better. And this is what we are doing here. It's about changing that dynamic and relationship to be better. So the other side of this was me starting to understand that, hold on a second, I want to get my consent. I want to get consent from the body. Do you even want to do this? Like, is this what's appropriate? Or am I writing some sort of disconnected, disassociated program to connect to my body, to push something onto my body, to deliver an outcome that's going to potentially make me feel better? I had a conversation with two of my educators who are about to start their own pelvic floor, TVM pelvic floor trainings. And I told them, I'm going to say something super triggering right now. And as educators, as individuals that are in this field, that are curious, I want your feedback. Why would I say this? Scrutinize me and give me solutions. Why would I say this? And how am I wrong in saying this? And the statement that I gave them was that I believe that most individuals, including myself in the past, who are focused on masturbation or self-pleasuring are actually, quote unquote, violating themselves. It's a self-violation. And one of the practitioners asked me, do you mean rape? And I was like, it could be. I'm not going to say yes or no to that, but it could be. And I'm like, please ask me, why would I say this? And one of them said, consent. Did you ask consent? And I was like, bravo. That's a big piece. Is my body even wanting to do this? And then the other person was like, well, let's think about it. We feel good after we do it, because that's a release. But are we forcing a release? And I was like, bravo. And then that's when I jumped in. I was like, with this modality, with the triple vagal method, we never force the body to do anything. This is not about trigger points, forcing cathartic type releases. It's none of that, because you can re-traumatize yourself. We try our best to allow the body to build enough safety to move through processes without it needing to force anything upon itself or another. And so it's so important to understand this piece of integrity, because this integrity piece I find completely missing from a lot of the modalities that I have been exposed to, that I have been told about, that I've went and explored. And I'm like, does anyone here address the consciousness that lives in the body and treat it like another person that you ask consent towards? Is this a part of us that is so disconnected, disassociated from our own bodies that we're trying to force an experience or something within ourselves that is not necessarily honoring the intelligence of our own body, the intelligence of our own being. And the other side of this is something that I explained to both of these educators was the following, that when we work with TVM, for instance, with the organs will release, the body will release, the fascia will release. The difference is, and here's the like ticker. It's like when you release, you're gonna always feel good. You're always gonna feel good because your body's gonna release, and when that muscle moves through and moves through whatever contraction that was built up, you're gonna feel a rush of, potentially oxytocin, endorphins, serotonin. You're gonna just feel blissful. And are we manually doing that through self-pleasuring that is unconscious, or sex that is unconscious, or interactions with our pelvic floor that is unconscious, because it's a highly interactive part of our body? It gives us a release really quickly in comparison to other parts, because feeling arousal or sexual connection is an easy one for most people. It's easier than feeling love. It's easier than feeling happiness or joy. It's a very primal feeling or sensation in the body that most individuals are very familiar with, even if they're disassociated or disconnected. And so what is an orgasm? Is it not just another version of a somatic release? It can happen anywhere else in our bodies. And are we potentially creating an attachment or a connection to that kind of orgasm or release that we are manually dictating onto our body, that in essence is actually pushing the body to produce those quote-unquote feel-good hormones and go through a process, a cathartic process that it didn't necessarily want to go through and it didn't necessarily need to go through. And we are violating its integrity. So these are big questions, huge questions. And I understand how controversial they are, and I'm here for it. And this is the body of work that we're doing. So coming back to the pelvic floor and the interactions of how interactive the fascia is and how interactive this technology is, the invitation here in this class is for us to go in with a lot of compassion, softness, slowness, integrity, and start to question any previous indoctrinations we may have had around what it is and how it is. The fascia and the pelvic floor is highly interactive. You put your hand there and it will start to change and it will start to communicate. This is the most beautiful thing. I have experienced a whole bunch of training and education in the field of traditional tantra and neo-tantra and conscious sexuality. And one of the things that I loved so much, that I hold so sacred to my heart, is the practice of that you can be with yourself or another and literally not do anything. And if you don't do anything, i.e. that in for instance, heterosexual relating or self-pleasuring with an object or whatever, is this like hyper manual arousal and manual movement. If you could just let go of that for a second and allow it to really communicate, you're in for that patience and that compassion and that presence. You're in for the biggest, most alive, most expansive experience of your life. But it's nothing that is taught out there. It is totally different. It's totally something that I had to go in and discover. And literally the only reason I discovered this was because of something that a person that I trained with, Master Mantak Chia, said, that in a heterosexual relating, in ancient China, the concubines would have to train their pelvic floors to interact with a male physiology penis in a certain way to control it. And I was like, whoa, well, what does that mean? How could that control it? And so I started to get very curious around how that can work. And then I didn't have a strong enough mind-body connection. So this is a little funny here. I didn't have a strong enough mind-body connection. So I tried to experiment with my lover at the time, and it didn't necessarily work. However, and I got really tired, like trying to no, like, you're gonna do what, Master Mantak Shia said you can do. And I just let go. And when I let go, I realized that there was this interesting communication that was happening, and my lover was blown away. And my lover was like, like, I can't breathe, like my heart's about to explode. And I'm like, just like, calm down, like, what is this? And so I share this because there's a lot here. There's a lot that we are not educated on. There's a lot that we do not necessarily know around how beautiful and amazing our pelvic floors are, the pelvis is, the technology of it. I have been so passionate about this part of our body for so long. I am so excited to be sharing this masterclass. I'm so excited to be sharing everything that comes through this. I'm going to be repopulating this drive as we move forward. So I'm so grateful that you are here. I'm so grateful that you're curious to understand what is here. Yeah. Just like, thank you. And I look forward to how you explore your pelvis and your pelvic floor, and how you unlock the magic that is here, and this deep sense of safety that comes from here. Because the other side of a neglected, because this is what I see in the field of somatics, in the field of embodiment, in the field of nervous system regulation, as an extremely neglected pelvic floor, an extremely neglected part of our psyche, an extremely neglected part of our entire being, that actually is synonymous with embodiment, is how we emerge in a body. It's extremely neglected. It's heartbreaking. It's not what it's meant to be. There's better ways of doing this. There's so much love to share, and the innocence and playfulness of this technology. I'm here for it. I'm glad that you're here for it. Let's learn from each other. Let's grow, and let's educate the world around this. This is such an integral part of who we are and what we are. And I love you for being here. I love you for understanding the value of this, the curiosity, the antidote to fear, which means safety. And safety is a prelude to every embodied, favorable emotion that we can ever experience, like love and happiness and joy and gratefulness and all of the good stuff, the juicy stuff, the best stuff. It starts here. It starts here. So thank you for seeing that. And thank you for being here in our growing and growth process of allowing humanity to see that this part is so incredibly powerful, so incredibly beautiful. I made a little song the other day around, if you're connected to your pelvic floor, you are no longer poor. And I really cannot sing, but the songs just started to come through. There's a lot of magic, there's a lot of power, there's a lot of quantum expansion that happens from this part of our self and our being. Yeah. So I'm excited, I'm grateful. Thank you. We have a lot to learn together, and I'm so grateful for the entanglement.